The first church I served as a pastor was in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. The people from there call themselves Yoopers because they are from the UP. Yoopers have a regional dish called a pasty. They're made of ground meat mixed with carrots, onions, potatoes, and rutabagas, all wrapped in dough and baked. They are delicious. Our church would make them for fundraisers. I'm not especially good in the kitchen, but I would stop in and visit and try to help. Once I tried to help by getting them some boxes. Small pasty orders can go in a bag, but a large order needs a cardboard box. I found some nice, sturdy boxes that they were giving away at the grocery store. They were from the liquor department. Each one had the name of some kind of whiskey emblazoned on the side. When someone asked the head pasty maker where he got all those boxes, he told them they were from the pastor. He failed to mention that I didn't actually drink all that whiskey. I tell that story because it relates to the gospel lesson for today. You see, that congregation didn't really care if the pastor had a drink on occasion, but there are places where it would be a scandal. Every religious institution on earth has some tradition surrounding what its people will eat or drink, or what type of songs they will sing or clothes they will wear. In today's gospel lesson, the Pharisees and the scribes were giving Jesus a hard time. They were giving him a hard time because his disciples were going against their tradition. They were upset with Jesus because his disciples did not wash their hands before they ate. No one knew about germs back then. This was not a matter of hygiene. The reason the Pharisees were upset was that the disciples were going against religious tradition. It was their tradition to wash the food, wash their hands, and wash the kettles and the cups that they used. If the disciples refused to follow this simple tradition of the elders, what else were they going to throw out? Who did they think they were? The Pharisees were mad because they were supposed to be the authority, and the disciples were not respecting their traditions. Sometimes we think we can be the ones who have the power to declare who is okay in God's eyes and who isn't. Jesus told the Pharisees that it doesn't work that way. He called to the crowd and said, "Listen to me, all of you, and understand. There is nothing outside a person that by going in can defile, but the things that come out are what defile. It is from within, from the human heart, that evil intentions come: fornication, theft, murder, adultery, envy, slander, and deceit. These evil things come from within. That is what defiles a person." Jesus was more concerned with what was in people's hearts than how they looked or how they fit in with the religious authorities' idea of what a good person was. The scary thing is that we are the religious authority of our day. Pastors, lay leaders, and all the faithful church-going folks. We are the ones who have the power to welcome people who are different or turn them away. What are we going to do with that power? In all the places I've lived, I've always been blessed to have a church home. I've never known what it felt like to be the outsider. I did come close once, and it was the only time in my life that church people made me feel bad about how I looked. I was living at the Lutheran School of Theology in Chicago. I needed a place to worship and volunteer on Sundays. A group of us decided on a little church that was within driving distance. Our group was made up of seminary students and their spouses. None of us had any money. We had student jobs that barely paid for our apartments. We didn't have nice clothes, but we didn't care. Jeans and t-shirts were fine with us. We didn't think it mattered. It didn't matter to us, but it mattered to some of the church ladies at the little Lutheran church we were visiting. I was embarrassed one Sunday when one of the leaders of the women's group took my friend Kim aside and told her we were not dressed well enough. She told her it was the tradition at their church to wear their Sunday best, and we were being disrespectful. She didn't know that we were wearing our best clothes. My friend Kim went outside the sanctuary doors and cried. She didn't just cry. She wailed and cursed. She was so angry and hurt. I knew that this was just one lady in one little church, but to Kim, it felt like God was rejecting her. If church people could be so mean, what did that say about God? Kim left the church that day. I don't know what happened to her, but I doubt she ever returned to any church. Someone's insistence on their own tradition broke her heart, and I think that breaks God's heart. Sometimes we start out being followers and imitators of Christ, but then we forget who we are. We confuse our rules, our fears, and our likes with the will of God. The epistle lesson for today explains it. James writes that we are to be doers of the word and not just hearers who deceive ourselves. If any are hearers of the word and not doers, they are like people who look at themselves in a mirror, go away, and immediately forget what they look like. If any think they are religious and do not bridle their tongues but deceive their hearts, their religion is worthless. I don't want my religion to be worthless. I'm sure you don't either. It's essential that we don't forget what being a follower of Christ looks like. We gather on Sundays and worship Him. We see ourselves reflected in the mirror of His love. We see our best and most holy selves, but sometimes we walk away and forget what that looks like. Sometimes we don't even get out the door before that happens. It hurt when someone at church judged me harshly for not having nice clothes. My clothes are not a reflection of who I am on the inside. That woman's meanness was not a reflection of her Christianity. She forgot what she looked like when she was judging me for how I looked. I was judged a long time ago for my clothes, but there are people right now who are being judged for something they can't take off. It's so much more serious than anything that has ever happened to me. They are being judged because of the color of their skin. And you would think in this country we would be past that by now. The week I wrote this sermon, a graduate student at Yale had to deal with the police questioning her because a white student called the police when she was found napping in a common area in the dorms. She was working on a paper and got tired. I can't even count the number of times I fell asleep in the library when I was in college. No one called the police. Recently, Bob Marley's granddaughter and a group she was with were detained by the police for carrying suitcases to their car from the Airbnb where they were staying. Before that, 2 black men were arrested for asking to use the bathroom at Starbucks before they had actually ordered any coffee. They were there for a business meeting and refused to leave, so the manager called the police. Black people are being questioned by the police for doing things that are legal and just plain ordinary. I find it embarrassing and shameful. It makes me wonder if the white people who are calling the police like this go to church. I know everyone does not go to church. Everyone does not claim to be a follower of Christ, but there are a lot of us. According to a Pew Research study, 33% of Americans report attending church at least once a week. Another 36% report that they go at least several times a year. 40% of Americans pray every day. That is a lot of people who claim to be religious. To quote James, if any think they are religious and do not bridle their tongues but deceive their hearts, their religion is worthless. Is our religion worthless? I don't think so, but we may have gotten off track. As white Christians, we could tackle this problem. White people are getting scared or angry when they see a black person in a place they don't expect and then calling the police. It is sinful. Pastors could talk about it from the pulpit. Sunday school teachers could discuss it with their students. We could host adult forums on the topic. Some honest soul searching over coffee and donuts on a Sunday morning could make a real difference in the world. We could teach each other to save our calls to the police for actual problems, because goodness knows there are plenty of actual problems in our communities. The police don't need to be dealing with our foolishness. We could remind each other to think before you pick up your phone. And again, in the words of James, you must understand this, my beloved. Let everyone be quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to anger, for your anger does not produce God's righteousness. When Jesus spoke with the Pharisees, he called them hypocrites for caring more about outward appearances than they cared about what was in their hearts. How things look on the outside was never very important to Christ. It shouldn't be important to Christians either. Did you know that more people attend church on an average Sunday morning than the number of people who watch Sunday night football during the football season? In 2016, 18 million people watch Sunday night football every week. Approximately 60 million people attend Sunday services on average. We are a very powerful demographic. What are we doing with that power? I know the church does a lot of good in the world, but I think we could do so much more. I'm embarrassed to admit that I have been part of churches in the past who have had bitter battles over the color of the carpet in the sanctuary. I have seen people almost come to blows during arguments over the proper order of worship. I have seen churches divided forever over the question of whether or not the flag should be in the sanctuary. James said true religion is concerned for people in need. True religion reaches outside the church building and makes the world a better place. We need to ask ourselves if we are wasting our power. There are millions of us. We could work to end racial bias. We could do more to fight homelessness and work to make sure children in our communities never go to bed hungry. One day, an expert on the law came to Jesus and asked him, "What is the most important commandment?" Jesus said that you should love the Lord with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. In other words, with everything you've got. He said that's the first and greatest commandment. And the second one is just like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. Everything else hangs on these two commandments. You can boil our entire religion down to loving God and loving our neighbors. Can you imagine the difference it would make if all 60 million of us left church on Sunday morning with a renewed commitment to love our neighbors? I am not talking about some vague, weak, cerebral notion of love. I'm talking about the kind of love that insists that your neighbor's rights are protected, a love that insists his dignity is respected and her children are fed. I'm talking about the kind of love that is willing to overcome the discomfort we feel when our neighbor doesn't look like us, when our neighbor doesn't follow our traditions or wear the same kind of clothes that we wear. I'm talking about the Jesus kind of love that insists on a religion that welcomes every person as God's precious child. Could you imagine what would happen if the 73% of Americans who identify as Christians would adopt this way of life? Our communities could be transformed. We follow a gentle and powerful Lord. We follow the Lord who stood outside that tomb and wept for Lazarus, and then called him to come out and live again. Let's start claiming some of that power. Jesus is calling us to honor him, not with just our lips, but with our very hearts. Let's not walk away from our churches on Sunday morning and forget what we look like.